This is the brand new 7Artisans 35mm with autofocus for full frame cameras, and I've been having a good time with this thing. Let's talk about it. So 35mm is one of my favorite focal lengths, just wide enough to get a little bit more context, and just close enough to be more generally useful for portraits and some shallow depth of field, all kinds of stuff. This actually goes for like half of similar lenses out there for L mount especially, so even though 7Artisans sent this out to me, I'm still going to be looking as hard as I can for any flaws or compromises this lens might have, but for around 300 bucks, it's hopefully at least pretty decent, and spoilers, it is. I actually love 35mm for all the reasons I talked about before, but also it's my favorite focal length for talking head YouTube content creation stuff. So the build is as good as anything 7Artisans has released so far. Metal construction, great focus, smooth clickless aperture ring with a notable click into and out of the automatic mode if you want to avoid the aperture getting bumped. It also has that handy customizable button which I use to turn on and off subject detection. It also closely matches the rest of the lenses in the series in weight and size, and even that common 62mm filter thread from the 24 to the 35 to the 50 and the 85. Plus, this one seems to have, I don't know if you can see, but it seems to have some weather sealing at the back. So I don't know how weather sealed this lens is overall, but at least a little bit better than the other ones in this series, I suppose. Not sure I would trust it 100%, but a nice backup against some light rain or dust, maybe. It also feels pretty well balanced on bigger cameras like the S1 II, or even on smaller cameras like the S9. Autofocus I find to be really smooth and natural, but in my experience a little on the slower side. Even with the maxed out speed and responsiveness on Lumix, it lags a little bit behind something like the native Lumix lenses or some Sigma lenses. Great for most things, but a tad slow for like really fast dance movements or sports or something like that. The linear focus also works really well on Lumix cameras here, so if you're on Sony, sorry, Lumix works fine. Unfortunately, you do see a little bit of breathing in the manual focus and autofocus modes. It's relatively decent, but not non-existent. As far as our image quality goes, we have some pretty good results like most of these guys' lenses so far. In the real world, honestly, I've had almost no issues, but we will be taking a closer look to see if I can find any. So zooming right in, the corners look a little bit dark, but let's check out the center, and right away, it looks pretty good. Stopping at 2.8 does make it a little bit better, but not noticeably so. Back at 1.8, the corners aren't terrible, a little bit dark, but 2.8 brightens them up and sharpens things up a little bit and removes some of the sort of chromatic aberration we're seeing over there. And of course, you can keep stopping it down if you want to, but it stays pretty consistent overall. One compromise of this lens seems to be the minimum focus distance, which is a super underrated thing for me personally. The distance that you can get to your subjects is not particularly close, and your subject seems to get a little bit of hazy and smudgy up close. The bokeh is a little weird. It's not bad, and especially in just like 4K video, I'm not really noticing anything, but yeah, that's something strange going on for sure. And I wish, even if the image quality was worse, I wish it could focus a little closer. Otherwise, there aren't any real aberrations in the image, just overall pretty solid. I have to say though, many of these 7Artisans lenses seem to have a bit of a touch of the 3D pop to me. There's only like one or two ED elements in most of these lenses. I think there's only one in this 35, which some say can bring out that 3D pop, and it seems to be here to me, but I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. As far as an autofocus lens goes, this seems to have a little bit more depth than average. Moving on to flare, that's always a concern for these more affordable lenses, I suppose. On the 35, it looks pretty good overall, just from an aesthetic standpoint. The sources of light blooms out a little bit on these lenses, I find, and you can certainly see the elements in your shots with the bright points of light. As a bit of an edge glare as well, not as bad as some of the other lenses. Compared to like 24 or 50 from this set, the contrast holds up pretty well, and I think it actually adds to some situations and some photos, but is technically a problem. So if you don't like it, use the lens when you can. The Sunstars, when stopped down, are pretty fancy too and can be quite pronounced, but something about the quality of them doesn't strike me as great. Just good. I don't know what it is. You tell me. What do you think? And the bokeh on a fast 35 is definitely an important factor here. And as is tradition with 7Artisans, apparently, they're imperfect and quirky, but in a unique way to this lens. And instead of a more pointy triangle look or a classic cat's eye you see in other lenses, the bokeh here just takes on this kind of squared off or like oblong type kind of shape, being just a little smoother when things are at a close focus and very blurred, but at longer distances from the camera, they do take on a pretty blocky type of shape, a little bit anyway. Overall, I think it again just does what I want, which is to bring in your subject to the focus. At the end of the day though, this is one of those quirks that is really minor, and again, everything else about the bokeh is great. There's not a bunch of highlighting, the texture is non-existent, they're very smooth, and the real only issue or quirk is that shape they take along the edges, which again, I find fine.
And to really nitpick, there's some outlining, but I think the biggest thing is just the kind of hazy look to the transitions when things are going into out of focus, both at normal distances and especially at close focus.
Overall though, this lens holds its own with the rest of the 7Artisans set, and against many lenses that are much more expensive, like the focus here is not that different from like the Sigma 35mm F2, which has just okay focus speeds. This is kind of the same there. I wish the close-up focus would be better. I wish the autofocus was a little bit better, but at the end of the day, for the price of this lens, this is very incredible. And I think if you get one lens, personally, I recommend 35 over 50 if this is going to be like your first prime. I rocked a 35 and 85 prime for the longest time because 35 is just wide enough to get more context. 85 can really go for that crazy blur, and 24 is just a little too wide for like some rooms. Like this room at 24 doesn't look great, and 50 is just a little bit boring. So 35, I think, for content creation, for talking head stuff like this, it's one of my favorite focal lengths. This is not the 7Artisans, but you get what I'm talking about. And again, you can get this lens. I mean, I'm on the Lumix lens now. I'll finally reveal it. So this lens is like half the price of a Lumix lens, half or less the price of some of these Sigma lenses. And with metal construction, switches, custom function, aperture ring, which is very helpful for something like the S9 that has a lack of controls, there's really interesting stuff going on here. And at the end of the day, I just like the images that it produces. That's really all I have to say. So thanks again to 7Artisans for sending this out. Thanks for you guys for watching. I know you guys have already commented and subscribed and all that stuff, so I'm not even going to ask. And if you are subscribed, which of course you are, I'll see you when I see you.